Makahanya haramita shingyo Genji Zaiboza Gyojin Hanya haramita jishoken gon Gai Gudo Isai Gu Yaku Shari Shiki Fui.
An old man always used to come to Master Hyakujo's sermons, and afterwards leave at once. One day he remained, and told the master that long before he had been master there. A monk had asked him whether an awakened man was still subject to the law of cause and effect, and he had answered that such a man was free from it. Whereupon he had become a fox for 500 lives. Could Master Hyakujo release him by turning the question? The master agreed, and the old man at once asked, "Is an awakened man still subject to the law of cause and effect?" "He does not obscure it," stated Master Hyakujo. On hearing this, the old man awakened, bowed his thanks, and as a special favour asked for the cremation of his fox's body, according to the funeral rites for monks. This is a famous encounter involving the great Master Hyakujo, and it also appears in a koan collection as well. It's a rather touching story and involves a number of well-established teachings, both from early Buddhism involving karma and rebirth, and also about the nature of wisdom as well, because this is what the question about the enlightened man, whether he's free from the law of karma, free from the law of cause and effect. Karma's a fascinating subject, and there are many various interpretations of it, and it's a vast subject as well. In fact, one could almost say that a proper understanding of karma is absolutely essential for the path, and that coming to that proper understanding of karma is indeed itself a release from it. Karma was inherited from Buddhism's parent religion, Hinduism, where karma also plays a role as well. Karma is almost like a moral law in Buddhism, but in Hinduism it is related to the rituals necessary to perform, usually upon death, for somebody to gain a good rebirth in the future. So when somebody dies, the priest has to come along and perform the correct rites absolutely precisely in order to ensure a beneficial future rebirth for the deceased. And the Buddha took that teaching and put, if you like, a little twist on it. Professor Richard Gombrich talks about this, says that much of Buddhism is ironic Hinduism, where the Buddha takes classic Hindu teachings and then puts his own particular spin on it. And karma was one of them. What the Buddha said was that he personalized and individualized karma, saying that actually no, karma is not about doing the correct rituals for somebody else. It's about one's own actions and about the consequences of one's own actions as well. This is what ensures the future rebirth. And of course that idea of a future rebirth also we need to be careful of as well. Certainly many Buddhists even today think about rebirth as in future lives, but rebirth also happens on a moment-to-moment basis. Remember, in Buddhism there is no I, there is no core essence of one's own self that can be reborn, because the Buddha denied that. He said the true nature of reality, the true nature of things, is that everything is empty of any self-nature whatsoever. So it obviously raises the question, what can be born, and what what is born and what will be born. In fact, even in the Dhammapada, there's an encounter when someone asks the Buddha, is the one who performs the act the same as the one who reaps the result? Looking at this law of cause and effect. So taking into consideration, the grand scheme of things, if one performs an act in this life, and according to the law of karma, the classical Buddhist interpretation of the law of karma, that act will, if it's an intentional act, will produce a result at some time in the future, not necessarily in this life. And the Buddha said, well, he said, if you think that the one who performs the act and one who reaps it, either in this life or in a future life, is one and the same, then that's a mistake. But if you think the two are different, then that also is an error, which is a bit confusing now, because what are we left with if the one who performs the act and one who reaps the result is the same, is neither the same nor not the same, then what have we got here? And the Buddha goes on to then recount a teaching known as the Pratichat Samutpada, or the 12-link chain of arising due to conditions. And this teaching, which you can look up in books or online, it's quite easy to come across and is rather technical, but what it is showing is an interdependent series of links, that one thing is linked to another. And if one of those links is broken, then that particular chain of being is stopped also. Now, if we look at how that translates into practice, this is really very much about how we cultivate ourselves. In Buddhism, there's that understanding, and with the practice of mindfulness and meditation, it's not difficult to see that this stream of consciousness has its own impetus. Whenever we sit down, for example, just to sit a very straightforward meditation on the breath for, say, half an hour, it's very easy to see that the thoughts and the daydreams and the emotional states very much appear to have their own impetus. It's not a matter that I can just switch them on or off. I mean, if it were really that easy, we'd all be perfect meditators. But what we also find is that as we sit meditation over a period of time, that the different episodes of sitting, the different sitting periods, certainly vary. I mean, sometimes we sit down and things are very quiet. Sometimes we sit down and everything is in turmoil. So it begs the question, what is conditioning these states of consciousness? Why is it that on a Tuesday everything's quiet, and on a Wednesday everything is a bit stormy inside? And it is the law of karma that is one of the laws of cause and effect that was detailed by the Buddha to explain why this is. And the Pratichat Samutpada is showing this. So these different states of either quiet or storminess, these are the states of rebirth that are coming to be and ceasing to be, coming to be and ceasing to be. In our practice, when we, for example, practice meditation or mindfulness, what is being cultivated alongside this is, i.e. this state of meditation itself, what is being cultivated is the ability to be able to open up in the middle of whatever the state is, whether it's quiet or whether it's stormy, and to stay with it, to not be buffeted about by it. Often what we find, obviously certainly when the passions are invoked or when there's something on my mind, something has happened, for example, and things are a little bit stormy, is that it's very difficult to stay in the here and now. I quickly get carried away. If something happened earlier today and I had a bit of an altercation with somebody, then that's what's replaying, and I take a side in that. I have a view on that. I was right, or was I right? Yes, of course I was right. Well, maybe I wasn't. We seesaw backwards and forwards, but we're always identifying with as this, what's known as a sort of dualistic state of consciousness. This consciousness often rips itself into two, and this is when we find ourselves in the passions. This is what we find. Everything turns very black and white. If we think about a hot, craving for something, or a very hot anger or irritation, everything goes black and white and very narrow very quickly. I take sides and I get carried on, and I'm justifying myself or doubting myself, and often alternating between those different states of consciousness, and they're all tied together. And what ties them together, what energizes them, is their karmic potentiality. So basically the law of karma says that like produces like. The more I indulge these divided states of consciousness, these duality-based states of consciousness, these I and other-based states of consciousness, because that's what dual consciousness centers around, an idea of self and other. The more I indulge in those things, then the more I create seeds for future similar states to arise in consciousness. So our actions of body, speech and mind are seeding the bed of consciousness, seeding the heart, if you like. And this is what produces those states of consciousness. Because we have the capacity to understand that, therefore it becomes possible to navigate the states of consciousness that are going to come up. To put it simply, and this is what we find in Buddhism as well, to put it simply, certain actions of body, speech and mind admire us in the passions, in states of duality, and in this conviction of the view of self and other. And other actions gentle that and lead away from it and take us to a more humanized state. If you look at that wheel of life, we remember that one of those states is the human state. And we also remember that the Buddha was quite clear that liberation is only possible from that human state. And what marks that human state in particular is the capacity for wisdom. And this is what's being referred to here. Now, wisdom in Buddhism doctrinally can be split into 5 facets, and again those can be looked up, but 2 that are particularly important, and all of them have to be realized. They're to do with the realization of the true nature of reality, what's known as the Dharmadhatu, or the Buddha nature. There's the realization of the nature of the heart, which is that the true nature of the heart, in the absence of thought coverings, in the absence of any obscuring kleshas or passions or delusion of I, that its nature is all reflective, that it reflects things as they really are. And what is being reflected in there is what's known as the wisdom of equality, and that wisdom of equality is that all things have the same nature, the same root nature. And the other wisdom that's reflected in there, the 4th one, is known as the wisdom of differentiation, and that is that even though everything has the same nature, there are different forms. So there is high and there is low, there is life and there is death, there is pain and there is pleasure, there is man, there is woman. So there's the sameness and there's the differentiation. And the 5th one has to do with the wisdom of compassion in action. That is how that all-seeing, all-reflecting heart responds to the circumstances on a day-to-day basis. And those 2 wisdoms there, particularly that wisdom of sameness, the wisdom of equality, and the wisdom of differentiation, if those 2 are not seen into thoroughly, then they can become easily misinterpreted. For example, with the wisdom of equality, to experience the sameness of all things, the same basic nature of all things, if that goes back into thought, if that seeing is not thoroughly established and made strong, then it can easily go into thoughts. And once it goes into thoughts and becomes views and opinions, then it can literally become, well, everything's the same, good is the same as bad, and now I don't have to bother. And from that, an error can arise. That is that having seen now the wisdom of equality, I'm now free from the separation into different forms, such as good and bad, or whatever else. And a lot of this sort of talk of the crazy wisdom, etc., comes out of this. And the crazy wisdom is sometimes used to show the wisdom of equality, but to get stuck on it It can, if there is still a trace of I there, then, well, in other words, I can just start showing off and declaring myself to be above all this. And that really opens up a license to do whatever I want, and it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see how that can go very wrong indeed. So the wisdom of equality has to be tempered with the wisdom of differentiation, the realization that there are different forms. There is such a thing as good and bad. There is such a thing as male and female. There is such a thing as high and low. But not to set one against the other. And this is the error. If the error of equality is that everything is now the same and differences don't matter at all, then the wisdom of differentiation is to realize that there can be differences, yet we don't have to either take sides with one against the other. In other words, even to take side with good and put it against evil. Hugely dangerous. I mean, we only have to look at the history of religion or the history of idealisms to see how horrific that can become, and it can become a license for some of the worst atrocities that we've ever committed as a species. So those two wisdoms have to be together, and they have to be thoroughly clear, and if they're not clear, then they can lead people into error. So these are not purely abstract things. If we like, it's rather like the mythos of St. George and the Dragon, this idea in the West, because this is very much with us, that that good and evil are entirely separate, and that our good, however I define that to be, will overcome evil in the end. There's a big fight, and then for a long time, and then good will overcome evil, and then good will prevail. In the East, particularly in the Chinese way of thinking, and of course Chan and Zen is Buddhism, Chinese-based, that's not possible, because light and dark, good and bad, they're tied together. If we think of that great yin-yang symbol, the two fish, the white fish with the black eye and the black fish with the white eye, they are always together, and that is to show that one produces the other. In other words, they're codependent, very similar to the wheel of life, very similar to the 12-link chain, those 12 links which are codependent. What comes before conditions what comes after. What comes after is dependent for its existence on what came before it. That yin-yang symbol is showing the same thing, or a very similar thing. So in that symbol it's not possible, because the opposites produce each other. Light is dependent on dark, and dark is dependent on light. Neither can be known without its opposite. Without that, it's simply not possible to have one without the other. So there could be no one will overcome the other and will prevail forever. It can only prevail for a time, and then gradually it will decay, and then its opposite will supersede it. So this is where those wisdoms of equality and differentiation really come in. And this is where that story of Master Hyakujo comes in. So here we have an ex-abbot of the same monastery that Master Hyakujo is currently incumbent in, and he comes up to Master Hyakujo because a monk asked him a long time ago, is an enlightened man, one who has seen his true nature, etc., free from the law of cause and effect, free from karma? In other words, is he no longer subject to the effects of his own karma from that? And he had replied, yes, he is. And in doing that, he had misled the monk who asked him that, who now presumably was in danger of going off and thinking now, such a one, having attained that, is free from the consequences of his actions. And the Buddha did not teach that. It was quite clear. It was the opposite that he taught. But the difference we have here is that in those in those wisdoms, in that sort of fivefold facet of wisdom, that mirror wisdom, the mirror that reflects these things, that reflects the forms of good and bad, and high and low, and male and female. It itself is not neither high nor low, neither male nor female, neither good nor bad. It simply reflects the way things are. And the problem with I is that instead of realizing that mirror nature, I identify with the reflections in that mirror: male, female, high, low, good, bad, and so on. And this is the mistake that is made. It is the mirror that is free from it. It is not I. It is never I who am free. I am one of the reflections, and in fact I'm an error. I'm an error in the reflecting. I am what obscures that mirror and prevents it from reflecting cleanly and clearly as well. And so Master Hyakujo's response is very clear in that when the old incumbent, who had, as a result of his karma, had been transformed into the body of a fox. And we have to remember, in China and Japan, the fox is a trickster figure. So the fox is one who will lead others astray and is up to all sorts. And so actually it's a very clear folkloric motif in the East. So obviously that is significant. So when the incumbent, then the old man, turns that question round, is such a one subject to the law of cause and effect? Master Hyakujo's reply, he does not obscure it, is very important, because there we have a classic middle way. There is still a high and low, there is still male and female, there is still good and bad, but such a one is no longer caught by those things. Such a one sees them clearly, and that such a one is not I, it's the heart mirror itself that reflects those things. And as a result of that, then, as a result of that clarification, obviously the old man now, having used up his fox karma, is now awakened upon hearing those words from Master Hyakujo, bows and asks a special favour for the cremation of his fox's body, according to the rites of the monk. In other words, because he was a monk himself, obviously, and obviously that life was meaningful, obviously very meaningful to him, and presumably, hopefully, I'm sure he did, receive his cremation with the due rites and diligence. Okay, well, we'll leave that there for today.